When did you lose faith in the playful guardian? My child and her closest companion are inseparable pals forever. Once, I questioned my kid, Maggie at 8 years old, if she dreamed of tying the knot, and she replied, "Mom, I'm already wedded." To Stacy, Greg, Stacy's father, was the entertaining adult who constructed blanket castles till the wee hours and crafted flapjacks in the form of their monograms. Maggie actually ticked off the calendar until her upcoming overnight stay there. Yet, when the subsequent offer arrived, Maggie claimed she felt exhausted, which struck me as strange for a youngster who was always in motion. The week after, I discovered an invitation from Stacy's mother regarding Saturday's slumber party, scrunched up in Maggie's school bag, concealed beneath her borrowed books. When I inquired about it, she muttered an excuse about overlooking it and avoided my gaze. That very afternoon, I spotted a camera in her satchel, one of those pricey electronic models, and when I probed its origin, she went rigid. "It's for a school assignment, Mom." "For which subject?" "I don't recall, just give me space," she yelled. It marked the initial occasion she'd ever shouted. Within weeks, Maggie transformed from my energetic wild child who favored reptile teas and deemed combing her locks unnecessary to abruptly pleading for foot treatments, wondering if she appeared attractive enough, fixating on fragrant creams at the store. She lingered before the reflection for a full 20 minutes one dawn, simply gazing at her image. And when I asked what occupied her, she stated, "Ensuring I appear proper." She was only 8. When Stacy's mother phoned about the approaching overnight on Friday, Maggie caught the conversation and began weeping so intensely she struggled for air, dashing to her space and banging the entrance. The following Monday during school collection altered it all. Greg signaled from the opposite side of the lot as usual, shouting, "Hi there, Maggie." And my youngster clutched my palm so firmly her fingernails pierced my skin, concealing her entire frame behind mine. Her whole form trembled. In the vehicle, she repeatedly glanced at the reflectors to confirm his automobile wasn't trailing us. She refused to don her beloved reptile top any longer, the one she'd sported bi-weekly for ages, insisting she required a mature appearance, since she was nearly grown. I observed she abruptly possessed cash, strayed bills in her savings jar she couldn't account for. "I discovered it," she claimed. But it didn't add up because a child of 8 doesn't simply stumble upon $50. When my spouse and I softly questioned if Mr. Gregg had acted inappropriately, she shook her skull so fiercely I feared she'd injure her spine. She merely repeated, "No, no, 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 no," endlessly. Additional items continued materializing in her chamber. A close-up reflector I'd never purchased, foundation from a line I don't own, enough varnish for a boutique, and these crafted buddy bands, but odd versions with pearls forming terms like lovely and improved. She began measuring her weight each dawn on our restroom balance, inquiring if she seemed overweight, drawing in her tiny abdomen. One morning, I attempted to view the images on that device. Maggie seized it and hurled it at the barrier with such force it broke apart, bellowing, "Those are personal." We conversed with Stacy's folks, and they were shattered. Greg repeatedly stated, "I can't comprehend, we were pals. We assembled that spaceship from boxes last month." But Maggie was particularly petrified of him. Not Stacy's mother. Not Stacy. Solely Greg. One afternoon, I discovered her sobbing in the center of her sleeping area, experiencing a meltdown over a sore spot on her sole from fresh footwear. None of it connected. Until one evening, when I remained awake with my ear pressed to my child's portal. I wasn't certain what I saw, but then I detected the snap of a shutter. I promptly burst inside. "Mommy! Forgive me, please don't get..." Angry. Nausea surged in my gut. My 8-year-old offspring was positioned on the ground, capturing impeccably arranged shots of her soles. I rushed forward and enveloped her in a firm embrace as she wept into my torso. Greg mentioned that you and Dad required funds. He claimed this would assist. I'm regretful for being rude. I simply didn't wish to be unattractive any longer. My spirit fractured in half. And that's when she ultimately surrendered the device. It was a fresh model. What I viewed as I scrolled through the pictures exceeded my darkest fears. And I intended to dismantle Greg manually. My palms quivered so intensely I could scarcely grasp the device, while Maggie's entire frame vibrated against mine. The images displayed her soles in various stances, colored nails, joints angled precisely, just like the promotions you encountered digitally, but these featured my 8-year-old offspring. My spouse erupted through the entry and glimpsed my expression before I silently formed the phrase "Dial 911" above Maggie's crown while she wailed into my garment. He snatched his mobile and retreated to the corridor while I clutched Maggie more securely, sensing her petite form quaking against me. The emergency dispatcher connected him to a dedicated line for youth mistreatment, and I overheard him detailing our discovery while Maggie persisted in apologizing repeatedly. They instructed him not to approach Greg or warn him, since it might compromise the probe, and we had to preserve all proof intact. My spouse returned and tenderly separated Maggie from me, suggesting they prepare warm cocoa with additional sweets. She accompanied him, but continued glancing rearward at me as if fearing I'd vanish. I retrieved a sack from the pantry compartment and delicately placed the device within without handling it excessively, my limbs still trembling so vigorously I could hardly inscribe the calendar mark and hour on the exterior. The fragmented remnants of the initial device remained in a container in my wardrobe, so I fetched those as well and stowed them in another pouch. 2 hours seemed eternal. But at last, a lady appeared at our threshold with a law enforcer trailing her. Deborah Carpenter possessed gentle gazes and a mild tone when she presented herself as an individual who aids youngsters in such circumstances. Detective Jonah Dobson was lofty and grave in appearance, but he grinned at Maggie when she peered from the edge of the family area. Deborah requested if she could converse with Maggie in her space where she'd sensed secure and at ease. I observed from the threshold as Deborah settled on the carpet with Maggie and extracted some figures from her satchel. She permitted Maggie to interact with them, while posing very tender inquiries about Greg and the sorts of activities they engaged in. Maggie's tone was so faint when she uttered, "Greg declared it was our confidential pastime," that I had to clasp the frame to prevent charging inside. Detective Dobson commenced photographing Maggie's chamber, concentrating on all the varnished containers arranged on her vanity. He donned protective covers and meticulously packaged each object, the reflectors, the cosmetics, those peculiar buddy bands with phrases on them. He clarified something regarding evidence chain and how this would assist demonstrate what occurred to Maggie. That initial evening was the most dreadful because Maggie wouldn't release either of us. She rested directly amid my spouse and me, rousing every 60 minutes sobbing and verifying we remained present. She murmured repeatedly, "Prevent Greg from arriving," and we assured her time and again that he couldn't harm her further. The subsequent dawn, Deborah returned with a binder packed with details about an entity termed the Youth Support Hub. She described it as a unique facility created solely for children, where Maggie could conduct a dialogue that would be documented, so she wouldn't need to recount her tale numerous times. The structure contained playthings and cozy spaces, unlike a law enforcement facility whatsoever. I contacted the academy while my spouse prepared Maggie's meal and informed them we possessed a protection worry concerning retrieval. The head didn't probe further, merely stated they'd implement fresh protocols immediately, and Greg's identity would be marked in their database. My spouse contacted his supervisor and organized to operate remotely for the coming weeks so one of us could constantly accompany Maggie. We established fresh guidelines, like maintaining the washroom entrance slightly ajar during cleansing time and ensuring all gadgets remained in the communal space where we could monitor them. Maggie trailed me everywhere, even merely to fetch a cup of liquid from the cooking area. We arranged a small mound of covers on the ground of our sleeping quarters, where she could rest if she became frightened. The child specialist they directed us to was truly compassionate when assessing Maggie, searching for any bodily indicators while a caregiver grasped her palm. Maggie persisted in questioning if the physician considered her attractive, which caused my core to ache once more. Detective Dobson phoned to mention their technical experts were laboring on retrieving erased images from both devices. He indicated what they'd uncovered thus far sufficed for detaining Greg, but they aimed to construct the most robust argument feasible. We needed to acquire fresh garments for Maggie, since she declined to wear anything Greg had witnessed her in. She selected reptile tops again at the market, and for the first instance in months, didn't request to examine the varnish. Each evening she'd awaken terrified and slip between us, gripping her plush pachyderm so firmly its coat was clumping. We ceased utilizing recording devices entirely. Even our mobile remained lens downward so she wouldn't glimpse the optic. The following dawn, Stacy's mother contacted while I was preparing Maggie's meal, inquiring why she hadn't encountered us in weeks. My passage constricted as I sought phrases that wouldn't shatter her reality. Deborah had advised us to state solely that there existed an active inquiry concerning the youngsters. I detected bewilderment in her tone when she wondered if all was fine among the children. My gut churned as I reiterated what Deborah mentioned while observing Maggie stir grains in her dish. 3 days dragged on before our session at the Youth Support Hub came. The edifice resembled a childcare center more than anything formal, adorned in vibrant hues, with a play area visible via the panes. Maggie's grip remained firm in mine as we proceeded through the main entrance into a reception filled with playthings and volumes. A lady with ebony tresses and compassionate gazes approached and lowered to Maggie's height. She presented herself as Nora Santiago and inquired about the plush pachyderm she carried. Nora guided us to a space that resembled a family lounge with plush seats and additional playthings dispersed about. She clarified that she and Maggie would converse in a dedicated area while my spouse and I lingered here. Maggie glanced rearward at us thrice before trailing Nora along a corridor adorned with children's creations. My spouse and I perched on a sofa opposite a large aquatic display, observing golden and azure swimmers circle endlessly. Neither could concentrate on the periodicals on the low table or the screen displaying animations softly in the nook. Every couple of moments, one of us would glance at the timepiece on the partition, then resume observing the swimmers. A full 60 minutes elapsed before Nora returned sans Maggie, who continued engaging with playthings in the adjacent space. She positioned herself opposite us and clarified she couldn't divulge specifics to safeguard the probe's wholeness, but she affirmed Maggie had revealed troubling actions and all was captured for judicial needs. This signified Maggie wouldn't need to reiterate her account to various individuals. Detective Dobson encountered us in the vehicle area later to gather the shattered device fragments I had stored in a footwear container. He applied covers and meticulously shifted each fragment into a proof sack while describing their technical group was highly skilled. They could potentially restore removed visuals that might indicate when it all commenced and aid in forging a firmer argument. That night, my device vibrated with a message from Greg wondering if Maggie desired to attend Stacy's celebration the following weekend. My limbs quivered as I displayed it to my spouse, who promptly captured an image and sent it to Detective Dobson. I yearned to fling my device at the barrier and shriek at Greg to never reach out again. Rather, I erased the note without replying, while my spouse embraced me as I trembled with fury. The subsequent dawn, we returned to the Youth Support Hub for Maggie's health assessment. The child specialist was a female with silver locks, who communicated quietly and proceeded deliberately, so Maggie could observe every action. A caregiver clasped Maggie's palm while the specialist examined her, seeking any corporeal evidence that harm had occurred. Maggie kept questioning if the specialist deemed her attractive, if she appeared fine, if she performed well. Each inquiry splintered my spirit further, as I comprehended the extent of Greg's influence. Following the assessment, Nora convened with us in that identical cozy space and described what she discovered about manipulation strategies. The buddy bands with terms like lovely and improved were typical methods offenders employ to make youngsters feel unique and adult-like. All the aesthetic items and reflectors were intended to direct Maggie's attention to her looks and make her believe she must appear a specific manner. The fun served as compensation, but also a method to make her sense she contributed significantly to her household. 2 days afterward, Detective Dobson contacted while Maggie attended her play healing session. He stated they'd obtained judicial approval for searching Greg's residence and all his digital gadgets. The authorities would carry it out that afternoon, and Stacy's kin would learn of the probe. He cautioned us to ready for outreach from them once they grasped the situation. Indeed, my device rang at 3 p.m. with Stacy's mother's digits displayed. Her tone was fractured and tearful as she informed me officers were inspecting her home and had escorted Greg to the precinct. She repeatedly asserted there must be an error, that Greg would never injure anyone, particularly not Maggie, whom he cherished like his own. But I detected the fracture in her tone when she voiced it, the uncertainty already infiltrating. I informed her I couldn't discuss it due to the probe, and disconnected amid her tears. My palms refused to cease quivering for the remainder of the day, as I persistently verified the fasteners on our entrances and panes. 3 days onward, we traveled to Maggie's initial healing session at a structure with animated creatures illustrated on the glass. When did you start doubting the carefree caregiver? My daughter and her dearest friend are bonded for life. One day, I asked my 8-year-old Maggie if she ever thought about getting married, and she replied, "Mom, I'm already hitched." To Stacy, Greg, Stacy's dad, was the lively parent who built pillow forts until the early hours and whipped up pancakes shaped like their initials. Maggie eagerly counted the days until her next sleepover at their house. But when the next invite came, she claimed she was too worn out, which felt odd for a child who was always on the go. A week later, I found a crumpled note from Stacy's mom about a Saturday slumber party tucked away in Maggie's backpack, hidden beneath her library books. When I brought it up, she mumbled something about forgetting and wouldn't meet my eyes. That same day, I noticed a camera in her bag, a fancy digital one, and when I asked where it came from, she stiffened. "It's for a school project, Mom." "For what class?" "I don't know, just leave me alone," she shouted. It was the first time she'd ever raised her voice. In just weeks, Maggie went from my spirited tomboy who loved her dinosaur teas and thought brushing her hair was a chore to suddenly begging for manicures, asking if she was beautiful enough, and lingering over scented lotions at the store. One morning, she stood in front of the mirror for a full 20 minutes, just staring. When I asked what she was doing, she said, "Making sure I look okay." She was 8. When Stacy's mom called about the next sleepover that Friday, Maggie overheard and burst into tears, so hard she could barely breathe, then ran to her room and slammed the door. The following Monday at school pickup changed everything. Greg waved from across the parking lot as usual, calling out, "Hey, Maggie." My daughter grabbed my hand so tightly her nails dug into my skin, hiding her entire body behind me. Her whole body was trembling. In the car, she kept checking the side mirrors to ensure his car wasn't following. She stopped wearing her favorite dinosaur shirt, the one she'd worn twice a week for months, saying she needed to look grown up because she was almost an adult. I noticed she suddenly had cash. Random dollars in her piggy bank she couldn't explain. "I found it," she'd say. But it didn't add up. An 8-year-old doesn't just stumble across $50. When my husband and I gently asked if Mr. Gregg had done something wrong, she shook her head so hard I worried she'd hurt herself. She just kept saying, "No, no, 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 no," over and over. Strange items kept appearing in her room. A magnifying mirror I'd never bought, concealer from a brand I don't use, enough nail polish to stock a store, and odd homemade friendship bracelets with beads spelling words like beautiful and perfect. She started weighing herself every morning on our bathroom scale, asking if she looked chubby, pulling in her little stomach. One day, I tried to check the photos on that camera. Maggie snatched it and threw it against the wall so hard it broke, screaming, "Those are mine." We spoke to Stacy's parents, and they were heartbroken. Greg kept saying, "I don't get it, we were friends. We made that cardboard rocket ship last month." But Maggie was terrified of him specifically. Not Stacy's mom. Not Stacy. Just Greg. One day, I found her sobbing in the middle of her room, freaking out over a blister on her foot from new shoes. It didn't make sense. Until one night, when I stayed up with my ear pressed against her door. I wasn't sure what I was listening for, but then I heard the click of a camera. I burst in immediately. "Mommy! I'm sorry. Please don't be mad." My stomach churned. My 8-year-old was sitting on the floor, taking perfectly posed photos of her feet. I rushed over and pulled her into a tight hug as she cried into my chest. "Greg said you and Daddy needed money. He said this would help. I'm sorry for being mean. I just didn't want to be ugly anymore." My heart shattered. That's when she handed me the camera. It was a new one. What I saw when I scrolled through the photos was worse than my worst nightmares. I wanted to tear Greg apart with my bare hands. My hands shook so badly I could hardly hold the camera, as Maggie's whole body trembled against mine. The photos showed her feet in various poses, painted toenails, ankles angled just so, like the ads you see online, but these were of my 8-year-old daughter. My husband burst through the door, saw my face, and I mouthed "Call 911" over Maggie's head as she sobbed into my shirt. He grabbed his phone and stepped into the hall while I held her tighter, feeling her small frame shake against me. The 911 operator transferred him to a child abuse hotline, and I could hear him explaining what we'd found as Maggie kept apologizing. They told him not to contact Greg or alert him, as it could jeopardize the investigation, and we needed to preserve all evidence. My husband returned and gently pulled Maggie away, suggesting they make hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. She went with him, but kept looking back at me, like she was afraid I'd vanish. I grabbed a paper bag from a kitchen drawer and carefully placed the camera inside without touching it too much, my hands still shaking so hard I could barely write the date and time on the bag. The broken pieces of the first camera were still in a box in my closet, so I got those too and put them in another bag. 2 hours felt like an eternity. Finally, a woman arrived at our door with an officer behind her. Deborah Carpenter had warm eyes and a soft voice when she introduced herself as someone who helps kids in these situations. Detective Jonah Dobson was tall and stern-looking but smiled at Maggie when she peeked around the corner from the living room. Deborah asked if she could talk to Maggie in her room, where she feels safe. I watched from the doorway as Deborah sat on the floor with Maggie and pulled out some dolls from her bag. She let Maggie play with them, while asking gentle questions about Greg and the games they played. Maggie's voice was so quiet when she said, "Greg said it was our secret game," that I had to grip the doorframe to stop myself from rushing in. Detective Dobson started photographing Maggie's room, focusing on the nail polish bottles lined up on her dresser. He wore gloves and carefully bagged each item: the mirrors, the makeup, those strange bracelets with words on them. He explained something about chain of custody, and how this would help prove what happened to Maggie. That first night was the worst. Maggie wouldn't let go of either of us. She slept between my husband and me, waking every hour crying and checking we were still there. She kept whispering, "Don't let Greg come," and we promised repeatedly that he couldn't hurt her anymore. The next morning, Deborah returned with a folder about the Child Advocacy Center. She explained it was a special place for kids where Maggie could give a recorded interview, so she wouldn't have to repeat her story multiple times. The building had toys and cozy rooms, nothing like a police station. I called the school while my husband made Maggie breakfast, informing them we had a safety concern about pickup. The principal didn't ask questions, just said they'd implement new procedures immediately and flag Greg's name in their system. My husband called his boss to arrange working from home for a few weeks so one of us could always be with Maggie. We set new rules, like keeping the bathroom doors slightly open during bath time and ensuring all electronics stayed in the living room where we could see them. Maggie followed me everywhere, even just to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. We made a little nest of blankets on our bedroom floor where she could sleep if she got scared. The pediatrician they sent us to was gentle, checking for physical signs while a nurse held Maggie's hand. Maggie kept asking if the doctor thought she was pretty, which broke my heart all over again. Detective Dobson called to say their tech team was recovering deleted photos from both cameras. He said what they'd found was enough to arrest Greg, but they wanted the strongest case possible. We had to buy new clothes for Maggie because she wouldn't wear anything Greg had seen her in. She picked out dinosaur shirts again at the store, and for the first time in months, didn't ask to look at nail polish. Every night, she'd wake up scared and crawl between us, clutching her stuffed elephant so tightly its fur was matting. We stopped using cameras completely. Even our phone stayed face down, so she wouldn't see the lens. The next morning, Stacy's mom called while I was making Maggie breakfast, asking why we hadn't seen them in weeks. My throat tightened as I tried to find words that wouldn't shatter her world. Deborah had told us to say only that there was an ongoing investigation involving the girls. I heard confusion in her voice when she asked if everything was okay between the kids. My stomach twisted as I repeated Deborah's words while watching Maggie push cereal around her bowl. 3 days passed before our appointment at the Child Advocacy Center. The building looked more like a daycare, painted in bright colors with a playground visible through the windows. Maggie's hand stayed locked in mine as we walked into a lobby filled with toys and books. A woman with dark hair and kind eyes approached, kneeling to Maggie's level. She introduced herself as Nora Santiago and asked about the stuffed elephant Maggie was holding. Nora led us to a room that looked like a cozy living room with soft couches and scattered toys. She explained that she and Maggie would talk in a special room while my husband and I waited. Maggie looked back at us 3 times before following Nora down a hallway covered in kids' artwork. My husband and I sat on a couch facing a fish tank, watching colorful fish swim in circles. We couldn't focus on the magazines or the TV playing cartoons in the corner. Every few minutes, one of us checked the clock, then went back to watching the fish. An hour passed before Nora returned without Maggie, who was still playing in the other room. She sat across from us and said she couldn't share details to protect the investigation, but confirmed Maggie had disclosed concerning behaviors, all recorded for court. This meant Maggie wouldn't have to repeat her story multiple times. Detective Dobson met us in the parking lot to collect the broken camera pieces I'd kept in a shoebox. He wore gloves, carefully transferring each piece into an evidence bag, explaining their tech team was skilled and might recover deleted images to show when it started and strengthen the case. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Greg asking if Maggie wanted to come to Stacy's birthday party. My hand shook as I showed my husband, who took a screenshot and sent it to Detective Dobson. I wanted to smash my phone and scream at Greg to leave us alone. Instead, I deleted the message without responding while my husband held me as I shook with anger. The next morning, we returned to the Child Advocacy Center for Maggie's medical exam. The pediatrician, a woman with gray hair, spoke softly and moved slowly, so Maggie could see everything. A nurse held Maggie's hand, while the doctor checked for physical signs of harm. Maggie kept asking if the doctor thought she was pretty, if she looked okay, if she was doing well. Each question broke my heart further, showing how deeply Greg's manipulation had taken hold. After the exam, Nora sat with us in that cozy room and explained grooming tactics. The bracelets with words like beautiful and perfect were classic ways predators make kids feel special and grown up. The beauty products and mirrors were meant to make Maggie obsess over her appearance. The money was payment, but also a way to make her feel she was helping her family. 2 days later, Detective Dobson called while Maggie was at her play therapy session. He said they'd gotten a judge to sign a search warrant for Greg's house and electronics. The police would execute it that afternoon, and Stacy's family would learn about the investigation. He warned us to prepare for contact from them. Sure enough, my phone rang at 3 p.m. with Stacy's mom's number. Her voice was broken, sobbing, saying police were searching her house and had taken Greg to the station. She kept insisting it was a mistake, that Greg would never hurt anyone, especially Maggie, whom he loved like his own. But I heard the doubt in her voice. I said I couldn't talk about it due to the investigation and hung up as she cried. My hand shook all day, checking the locks on our doors and windows. 3 days later, we drove to Maggie's first therapy session at a building with cartoon animals on the windows. The therapist had curly auburn hair and sat on the floor with Maggie while I watched from a corner chair. She brought out a large box of wooden blocks and asked Maggie if she wanted to build something. Maggie stacked the blocks high, creating a tall barrier almost to her chin. Then she found a small plastic doll in the toy box and placed it behind the wall. She needs to hide from the bad picture taker, Maggie said, and the therapist nodded, jotting something in her notebook. They played for an hour while I sat there, fighting tears, watching my daughter express her fear through toys. When we got home, Detective Dobson called with news about the cameras. The tech team had recovered photos from both, even the broken one Maggie had smashed. They found images dating back 3 months, hundreds stored on memory cards. The evidence was enough for criminal charges, but he warned the legal process could take a year or more. My stomach sank, knowing it would drag on, but at least they had proof of Greg's actions. 2 days later, we attended a parent education session at the Child Advocacy Center. 6 other parents sat in a circle as a counselor discussed how kids respond to trauma, bedwetting, nightmares, clinginess, or unexplained anger. One mom cried when the counselor mentioned kids blaming themselves, and I realized we weren't alone in this ordeal. It helped slightly, knowing others face similar horrors. The counselor gave us handouts on warning signs and coping strategies, urging patience as healing takes time. That weekend, we got devastating news that made me want to lash out. Greg had posted bail and was free. A restraining order barred him from coming near Maggie, our home, or her school, 500 feet minimum. But it didn't feel like enough, so I bought security cameras for our house. My husband installed them on phones and tablets. Made it worse, so we locked them in a kitchen drawer each night. Maggie kept the key under her pillow, a small act that gave her some control. 2 weeks after Maggie's interview at the Advocacy Center, Detective Dobson called with more news. Another family reported their 6-year-old acting strangely after playdates at Greg's house, having accidents, and crying during school photo sessions. The investigation was expanding to see if Greg had harmed other kids. Part of me felt sick at the thought of more victims, but part felt relieved that others would believe us. A few days later, Deborah said Stacy's mom wanted the girls to have a supervised playdate at the Advocacy Center. She'd moved with Stacy to her parents' house across town. When I asked Maggie if she wanted to see Stacy, she got quiet, picking at her nails. What if she's mad I told on her dad? I assured her Stacy wasn't angry and missed her, but Maggie seemed scared. We tried it anyway, as the therapist thought it could help. The playdate happened in a room with toys and art supplies, supervised by Deborah and a therapist. The girls sat at a small table, coloring silently at first. Then Stacy whispered, "My daddy's gone," and Maggie looked up. "He was mean to me," Maggie said, and Stacy nodded, and they kept coloring quietly together, no giggles or games like before. We met with the prosecutor, Chandler Lee, who wore a gray suit and carried a briefcase full of papers. He explained the charges against Greg: exploitation and child endangerment. The words made me nauseous, but I focused on his explanation of the process. Greg could face 20 years if convicted, but Chandler warned that plea deals were common, often resulting in less time because trials are tough on kids. He said to prepare for that possibility, though it wasn't fair. Later, my husband found crackers and juice boxes under Maggie's bed, granola bars in her closet, and fruit snacks in her drawers. When we asked, she cried, saying she didn't know why she was hiding them. The therapist said it was about control and safety, common in traumatized kids. We left a basket of snacks in her room for her to access anytime. 2 weeks later, Chandler called while I was making lunch. Greg's lawyer wanted a plea deal to avoid a trial, sparing everyone trauma. We debated for hours after Maggie went to bed, wanting maximum punishment, but not wanting Maggie to relive the pain. The next day, I found Maggie surrounded by her dress-up clothes, cutting them into pieces with safety scissors. Pink tulle from her princess costume was scattered like confetti. She looked up, tears streaming, and said she didn't want to be pretty anymore. I sat beside her, helping her cut without speaking. The therapist later said this was Maggie rejecting Greg's imposed standards, a healthy sign of processing. 3 months passed with meetings, paperwork, and lawyer calls. Then we attended a pretrial hearing. My mom offered to watch Maggie, but the victim advocate said she could wait in a special courthouse room. Maggie wanted to be near us, so we brought coloring books and snacks. The advocate took her to a room with toys while we entered the courtroom. I saw Greg for the first time since it all came to light. He sat with his lawyer, looking smaller, his suit too big, his hair thinner, his face aged. I wanted to scream, but stared ahead. The hearing involved lawyers discussing evidence and timelines, much of it over my head. After an hour, we got Maggie, who was coloring butterflies, unaware Greg was nearby. The judge ruled Maggie's Advocacy Center interview could be used as evidence, meaning she wouldn't have to testify in court. Relief hit me so hard I cried in the hallway. My husband squeezed my hand tightly. A week later, Deborah shared that Stacy's mom had filed for divorce, moved to her parents with Stacy, and enrolled her in a new school. She sent a letter apologizing for not seeing the signs, promising to help Stacy heal. I cried, feeling her pain as a fellow mom. Maggie's school counselor called with uplifting news. Maggie was spending recess with younger, lonely kids, sharing snacks, and teaching them to draw butterflies. It showed her kindness was returning. Then Chandler called with sickening news. Greg's computers revealed he'd sold images online, making it a federal crime. The FBI joined the case, increasing potential prison time. The thought of those photos online made me vomit. That night, Maggie wasn't in her bed. I found her in her closet, nestled in blankets, saying it felt safer. We added twinkle lights, pillows, and a lantern to make it cozy. 2 days later, Greg's parents' lawyer offered money for therapy and compensation if we'd push for lesser charges. My husband hung up immediately. No amount could make us help Greg. We told Chandler, who said it showed Greg's guilt. For months after that awful night, Maggie wore her dinosaur shirt again, nervously seeking approval. I turned away to hide happy tears. At therapy, the therapist nodded as Maggie played with blocks. Another family came forward about their 6-year-old, who showed similar signs after Greg's house, joining our case. We met them at the prosecutor's office. Their daughter's scared eyes broke my heart again. The mom and I cried, holding hands, understanding each other's pain. Detective Dobson later shared that Greg's computers revealed 3 more potential victims from other states, expanding the investigation. The FBI took over parts of the case, and Greg's bail was revoked as a flight risk. My husband cheered, but I felt ill thinking of more victims. In therapy, Maggie threw a toy car and screamed she hated Greg, a breakthrough the therapist had awaited, signaling Maggie was beginning to express her anger. The therapist had wavy chestnut hair and sat cross-legged on the floor with Maggie while I observed from a chair in the corner. She pulled out a large crate of wooden blocks and asked Maggie if she'd like to create something. Maggie began piling the blocks high, forming a towering barricade nearly up to her chin. Then she picked a tiny plastic figure from the toy chest and placed it behind her wall. "She's hiding from the scary photographer," Maggie whispered, and the therapist gave a gentle nod, scribbling in her notebook. They played for an hour while I sat there, holding back tears, watching my daughter channel her fears through toys. When we got home that afternoon, Detective Dobson called with updates on the cameras. The tech team had recovered images from both devices, even the shattered one Maggie had thrown against the wall. They found photos stretching back 3 months, hundreds stored on memory cards. The evidence was sufficient to press charges, but he cautioned that the legal process could drag on for a year or more before a trial. My heart sank at the thought of such a long ordeal, but at least they had solid proof of Greg's actions. 2 days later, we attended a parent education session at the Child Advocacy Center. 6 other parents sat in a circle as a counselor explained how trauma affects kids, regressing to bedwetting, nightmares, clinginess, or sudden bursts of anger. One mother broke down when the counselor mentioned children blaming themselves, and it hit me that we weren't the only family enduring this nightmare. Knowing others shared our pain offered a sliver of comfort. The counselor handed out pamphlets on warning signs and coping techniques, stressing that healing takes time. That weekend, we received crushing news that made me want to lash out. Greg had made bail and was out free. A restraining order barred him from coming within 500 feet of Maggie, our home, or her school, but it felt inadequate. I went to an electronics store and bought security cameras for our house. My husband installed them on every door and window while I set up the monitoring app on my phone. I checked it obsessively every time a car passed or the doorbell chimed. Maggie began waking from nightmares, screaming about cameras spying on her through the walls. Phones and tablets seemed to worsen her fear, so we started locking them in a kitchen drawer each night. Maggie kept the key under her pillow, a small gesture that gave her a sense of control. 2 weeks after her Advocacy Center interview, Detective Dobson called with more news. Another family reported their 6-year-old acting oddly after playdates at Greg's house, wetting herself and crying during school photo sessions. The investigation was growing, exploring whether Greg had harmed other children. Part of me felt sick at the possibility of more victims, but part felt relieved that our story would gain credibility. A few days later, Deborah called to say Stacy's mom wanted the girls to have a supervised play date at the Advocacy Center. She'd moved with Stacy to her parents' home across town. When I asked Maggie if she wanted to see Stacy, she grew quiet, picking at her nails. "What if she's upset I told on her dad?" she asked. I reassured her that Stacy wasn't angry and missed her, but Maggie seemed hesitant. We decided to try it, as the therapist believed it could benefit both girls. The playdate took place in a room filled with toys and art supplies, overseen by Deborah and a therapist. The girls sat at a small table, coloring in silence at first. Then Stacy murmured, "My daddy's gone away," and Maggie glanced up. "He was mean to me, too," Maggie said softly, and Stacy nodded, and they continued coloring side by side, without their usual giggles or games. We met with the prosecutor, Chandler Lee, who wore a charcoal suit and carried a briefcase stuffed with documents. He outlined the charges against Greg: producing exploitative material and endangering children. The words turned my stomach, but I focused on his explanation of the legal process. Greg could face 20 years if convicted, but Chandler warned that plea deals often result in lighter sentence, as trials are grueling for child victims. He advised us to brace for that possibility, though it felt unjust. Later that week, my husband found granola bars and juice pouches hidden under Maggie's bed. There were fruit snacks in her closet and crackers stuffed in her dresser. When we asked, she sobbed, saying she didn't know why she was hoarding them. The therapist explained it was about seeking control and safety, common in kids who've experienced trauma. We decided not to make a fuss and placed a basket of healthy snacks in her room for her to take whenever she wanted. 2 weeks later, Chandler called while I was preparing lunch. Greg's lawyer proposed a plea deal to avoid a trial, sparing further trauma. We debated late into the night, wanting Greg to face maximum punishment, but dreading the toll a trial would take on Maggie. The next day, I found Maggie surrounded by her dress-up clothes, cutting them into pieces with safety scissors. Pink tulle from her fairy costume littered the floor like confetti. She looked up, tears streaming, and said she didn't want to be pretty anymore. I sat beside her, helping her cut without speaking. The therapist later said this was Maggie rejecting Greg's imposed standards, a healthy step in her healing. 3 months passed with endless meetings, paperwork, and lawyer calls. Then we attended a pretrial hearing. My mom offered to watch Maggie, but the victim advocate said she could wait in a special courthouse room. Maggie wanted to stay close, so we brought coloring books and snacks. The advocate took her to a toy-filled room while we entered the courtroom. Seeing Greg for the first time since the truth emerged was jarring. He sat with his lawyer, looking diminished in an oversized suit, his hair thinner, his face aged. I wanted to scream, but stared straight ahead. The hearing involved lawyers discussing evidence and timelines, much of it confusing. After an hour, we retrieved Maggie, who was coloring butterflies, unaware Greg was nearby. The judge ruled that Maggie's Advocacy Center interview could serve as evidence, sparing her from testifying. Relief overwhelmed me, and I cried in the hallway as my husband gripped my hand. A week later, Deborah shared that Stacy's mom had filed for divorce, moved to her parents with Stacy, and enrolled her in a new school. She sent a letter apologizing for not seeing the signs, vowing to help Stacy heal. I wept, feeling her pain as a fellow mother. Maggie's school counselor called with heartening news. Maggie was spending recess with younger, lonely kids, sharing snacks and teaching them to draw butterflies, showing her kindness was resurfacing. Then Chandler called with sickening news. Greg's computers revealed he'd sold images online, escalating it to a federal crime. The FBI joined the investigation, increasing potential prison time. The thought of those photos circulating made me vomit in the kitchen sink as my husband held my hair. That night, Maggie wasn't in her bed. I found her in her closet, curled up in blankets, saying it felt safer. We added twinkle lights, pillows, and a lantern to make it cozy. 2 days later, Greg's parents' lawyer offered money for therapy and compensation if we'd push for lesser charges. My husband hung up immediately. No sum could make us help Greg. We told Chandler, who said it signaled Greg's guilt. For months after that terrible night, Maggie wore her dinosaur shirt again, nervously seeking approval. I turned away to hide joyful tears. At therapy, she threw a toy car and screamed she hated Greg, a breakthrough the therapist had anticipated. She kicked the dollhouse and tossed cushions around while the therapist calmly observed, later explaining that Maggie's shift from fear to anger was progress, showing she was beginning to see the abuse wasn't her fault. 2 weeks later, Deborah suggested a support group for families dealing with child exploitation. Though hesitant to share with strangers, we tried it. The meeting was in a community center basement with about 15 families. While parents talked in a circle, Maggie played in a nearby room with other kids who'd faced similar traumas. One father shared finding photos on his son's phone. A mother said her daughter refused to sleep in her bed. Their stories made me feel less isolated. The group leader provided resources on trauma therapy, legal advocacy, and crisis hotlines, giving me hope we could endure. Maggie befriended a girl named Macy with a similar experience, and they colored together while parents swapped coping tips. We exchanged numbers with other parents, starting a group chat for tough days, which outnumbered the good. Chandler called with news that twisted my gut, though I'd braced for it. Greg's lawyer proposed a plea deal: guilty to all charges for 15 years in federal prison, lifetime sex offender registration, and no contact with minors, including Stacy. It would spare Maggie from testifying, but Greg wouldn't face the maximum 25 years. My husband, furious, paced the kitchen, insisting 15 years wasn't enough. I shared his anger but feared a trial's toll on Maggie. We debated until 3 a.m., finally agreeing to follow Chandler's recommendation, given his expertise. In therapy, Maggie made a body safety poster, writing rules like her body being hers alone and no secrets about touching. She decorated it with stickers and hung it beside her dinosaur posters. Seeing her reclaim control brought tears. I hid in the hallway. 5 months after finding her with the camera, Maggie asked for a dog for protection, still scared of nighttime noises. At the shelter, she ignored the puppies and chose a calm golden retriever, returned twice for being boring. She sat with him, and he rested his head in her lap. She named him Shield and begged to take him home. Shield slept by her door every night, following her like a guardian. 3 weeks later, Chandler said the plea deal was progressing. Greg would admit guilt in court the following Monday, and we'd watch via closed-circuit TV in a separate room. We held hands in that room as Greg, in an orange jumpsuit, confirmed to the judge that he'd produced inappropriate images of multiple minors for distribution. Hearing his admission hit hard, and I vomited in the courthouse bathroom as my husband held my hair. The next day, Stacy's mom sent a letter apologizing, saying Stacy missed Maggie but didn't blame her. Maggie dictated a reply, saying she missed Stacy but needed time before they could play again, maybe someday at a park with both moms present. 3 weeks later, we started family therapy at a center with large windows and toys in the waiting area. We sat on blue cushions in a circle. My husband admitted to dreams of attacking Greg with a bat, his hands trembling despite his calm tone. I shared how I checked on Maggie 20 times a night, replaying missed signs. Maggie played with a sand tray, building walls around a tiny figure. The therapist said trauma impacts families, and we'd heal together. We attended every Tuesday, gradually discussing normal topics like Maggie's grades. 6 months after that night, Maggie signed up for the school talent show, surprising us since she'd shunned attention. She chose a song about courage, practicing for weeks with Shield by her door. At the show, we sat in the front row as she stepped onto the stage in her dinosaur shirt and sparkly sneakers. Her voice quavered at first but grew bold, belting out lyrics about standing strong. The audience erupted, clapping for 3 minutes, some parents crying. The principal hugged her tightly. 2 days later, Chandler called about Greg's sentencing. We watched from a separate room as Maggie stayed at school, observing butterflies in the garden. The courtroom was packed with parents and investigators. The judge called Greg's actions a vile betrayal of innocence, sentencing him to 15 years without early release and lifetime registration. When we picked up Maggie, she asked if the bad man was gone forever. We said for a very long time. The next week, the FBI's victim services covered Maggie's therapy and medical costs, a relief since insurance kept denying claims. This ensured we could continue with her skilled therapist. In one session, Maggie wrote letters to her younger self, saying it wasn't her fault, decorating them with dinosaurs and butterflies, showing she was reconnecting with herself. 7 months in, Maggie wanted to shop for clothes she chose herself. At the store, she spent an hour feeling fabrics, picking 3 dinosaur shirts, 2 sparkly sneakers, and a butterfly dress. She said she wanted clothes that felt like her, not what others expected. That week, the court ordered Greg's assets sold to fund restitution for victims, securing Maggie's therapy and future education. The therapist introduced EMDR, where Maggie followed a light while recalling bad memories. After 3 sessions, her nightmares dropped to twice a week. She slept in her bed again, with Shield beside her. One morning, she announced she'd slept through the night. We joined a group chat with other families, sharing updates. One mom said her daughter feared school. We offered tips. Another dad shared his son's return to sports, giving us hope. We met monthly for coffee, while the kids had group therapy, easing our isolation. 8 months after that night, Maggie asked for a dinosaur-themed birthday party at the park. She invited 10 kids, chose dinosaur plates, and helped make a chocolate cake with green frosting. At the party, she hesitated at first but joined the kids playing as dinosaurs, roaring as a T-Rex with her friend Macy. Her real laugh, not forced, warmed my heart. 9 months later, Maggie started a butterfly garden at school with her counselor's help, teaching younger kids to care for it. She wore her dinosaur shirt proudly, and her nightmares became rare. At therapy, she drew a picture of herself as a strong dinosaur, saying, "I'm not scared anymore." We framed it above her bed, a symbol of her resilience. Greg's actions would never define her. She was reclaiming her childhood, one brave step at a time.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a twist. Stay tuned to Reddit Tales Times for your daily dose of drama, laughs, and unbelievable stories.